I think it was Andy Edwards. You know Andy? It's like he was on Beato. Just like a English commentator on music.
By that time, in the 60s, Miles was already, I think, into his late 40s. He was already, had accomplished an incredible amount in music, and he had a young crew with him. And from that quintet with Herbie, Wayne, Tony, and Ron, that grew into the next quintet, which I was a part of, with Jack DeJohnette, and Dave Holland, and Wayne. And then that kept growing into the Bitches Brew recording, and into Miles's later bands that became more rock-oriented and more beat-oriented that way. There was this whole transition that took place. But the main ingredient there, if there was any special ingredient, was Miles and the way he led the way.
Hello and welcome to this video. Let's talk about the beauty and majesty and spiritually enlightening truth that can be found in the world of music. And today we're going to be exploring the musical world of Miles Davis, and specifically the electric albums he made in the 1970s. Very influential albums, but troublesome albums, and I think not go-to albums for most mainstream audiences that have grown up listening to perhaps Sketches of Spain or Kind of Blue. These are difficult albums to get your head around. On this video, I'm going to be really trying to tell the truth about these albums, and if you want to approach this period in Miles Davis's career, hopefully this will give you a different insight. This isn't going to be biographical. It's going to be me going through each album and trying to explain each one, how it relates to the other albums, and what's on those albums, and what I think Miles was trying to do, if he was trying to do anything at all. And to really understand what's going on these albums, we need to back up a little bit and make a point about Miles Davis that is seldom made. For many people now, Miles Davis is seen as the great visionary musician, always looking into the future, never wanting to rest on his laurels, never wanting to play what he played before. A restless soul, always looking for innovation and trying to move forward. But of course, he could afford to do that because he was a very successful jazz musician with good selling albums and doing great gigs. Miles was used to that position. He'd come from a quite affluent family and he liked the good things in life, including women and drugs. After his period with Charlie Parker in the 1940s, where he played bebop with the best of them, with Charlie Parker, and did an incredible job in there. He became known for having a slightly different sound to Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy Gillespie was virtuoso, fluid, powerful. Miles was more introverted in his sound. The textbooks will tell you that after his departure from Charlie Parker in the late 1940s, he then went on to make the Birth of the Cool album. But of course, this album wasn't released to the end of the 1950s. He wasn't known for that. Why did Miles Davis become famous? Well, firstly, in 1954, he kicked the heroin habit. That was the first thing he did, so he could actually have a career that wasn't just turning up to dates and doing anything just to get the money and spend it on drugs. When he emerges with his act together, he starts to make albums where he's doing the standard jazz standards, but he brought a mournful, quiet, almost like postmodernist, existentialist approach to jazz improvisation. This wasn't about, fast notes and the fluidity of Charlie Parker. Miles Davis represented something else, and it chimed with the 50s. It was outsider. It was outsider music. It was introverted. His sound sounded like James Dean looked, basically. So, because he had this sound, it worked best when it was transformative. Miles Davis could play a Disney song like Someday My Prince Will Come, or maybe something like Bye Bye Blackbird, and his sound and approach would change it. He would change that and bring out something else, and it chimes with the times. I think there were very many people that would like to come home from work in the 1950s and put a Miles Davis album on and be taken away into something that was cool. Miles Davis was the epitome of cool. He attracted the best musicians to his band, and in doing that, the music was pushing the boundaries. Miles Davis knew how to run a band and get the best out of his musicians. Kind of Blue, that was made in 1959, goes on to become the biggest selling album in jazz history. He makes Sketches of Spain with Gil Evans. And then, after dissolving the first great quintet, which featured Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Philly Joe Jones sometimes, or Jimmy Cobb on drums, Bill Evans, or Red Garland, or Wynton Kelly on piano, and Paul Chambers on bass. That was the first great quintet. But he goes on in the 1960s to form an even greater quintet. Now, this is loved by many people. The great quintet that features Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, Ron Carter and Herbie Hancock was exploring a certain type of free jazz that was much more palatable to a mainstream audience. Those albums are loved, and they are great albums. The experiments that were going on in free jazz that Coltrane had gone on to do, but more importantly that Ornette Coleman had gone on to do in the early 60s, Miles wasn't a fan of. And he made a statement, which I think the statement was that he felt like Ornette Coleman played like someone was standing on his foot. He wasn't a fan of all this free jazz. Of course, he was from the old school bebop world, wasn't he? He'd explored modality. But just turn it up and play whatever you want, is that what this is all about? Miles is actually slow to grasp this, but not the musicians in his band. Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Wayne Shorter and Tony Williams are younger, and they're interested in what Ornette Coleman's doing. Tony Williams, who joined the band at sort of 17 or 18 years, went straight on to make albums like Point of Departure, like with Andrew Hill, and Eric Dolphy's incredible Out to Lunch. So they're bringing these influences in. Miles' natural way of running a band, where he is drawing upon the musicians and actually trying to get the musicians to go beyond themselves, brings those influences in. With the dissolution of the great quintet of the 1960s, he forms another quintet, which is equally brilliant, but not as greatly discussed. This had Dave Holland on bass, Chick Corea on piano. Later, Keith Jarrett was also added on piano. Originally, it still had Wayne Shorter, but you had Dave Liebman come in, Steve Gross were coming on saxophone, and most importantly, Jack DeJohnette on drums. He's touring in that band, and that band is exploring even deeper into this free jazz territory. All right, free jazz is really important to what Miles Davis is doing at this point. He seems to have taken on what Ornette Coleman was exploring. But he's also become interested in modern classical music, especially Stockhausen. And his interest in Stockhausen means he's interested in the very nature of music, how that exists. Stockhausen was exploring soundscapes which could almost point to the eternal now. Music going beyond the confines of a 5-minute or 10-minute song. The minimalists are doing the same thing. Suddenly scale changes and Miles becomes interested in that, a sort of static hanging in the air sound which suits his trumpet playing greatly. But how do jazz musicians operate within that system? He also becomes interested in tape. Would it be possible to do what he did on Kind of Blue, to bring in very, just sketches of tunes and let the musicians find their way into them, and then utilize the recording process as a kind of composition, and then cut up the tape to create structure? But also, you have to look to the fact that Miles was under pressure. He's signed to CBS Records. He has been a good, solid proposition for them. But CBS, being a major label, has moved into signing rock bands. And suddenly the numbers are much bigger. He notices that the record labels aren't so much interested in him anymore. They're interested in Jefferson Airplane or Jimi Hendrix or Sly and the Family Stone or even the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. He wants his music to speak to that audience. His desire to be new, his desire to be at the cutting edge was always so his music would appeal to the street. Miles had a very strange relationship with the street. A quite small fellow, a vulnerable sound, a quite effeminate man in a way, very beautiful in his look, was also seemed to be enamoured with pimps and street culture. But he was not that. He was very middle class. But he sported with that, and there was a dichotomy there. Well, I would say even a dialectic between him being the tough guy and this incredibly... I've got a tickle up my nose. I hope it's not this hat. Let me just let this get out of the way. The whole thing about being a YouTuber is not being phased when these things happen. So many albums would portray this sort of hard-edged street sound, but a vulnerability at the same time. This is very evocative and compelling. That's the word I'm looking for the audience. Miles had an inbuilt sound which was always loved by a large amount of people. It was a gift that I don't think he had to try to do. It was just there. And in the way he played, in the way that he would leave space, not go off on flights of fancy like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, but more play a phrase and then see how that reacted. He realised he could act almost like a preacher, but almost like the inversion of a preacher in a way, where he would put in often younger musicians in front of him, and he would stand in front of them and he would play, and then they would respond, and he would play and they would respond. At this point, he decides to, rather than put the album title with Miles Davis, he starts to sometimes put directions in music by Miles Davis. He's like an infernal conductor, but he's conducting new forms. It's all very exciting, it's all very new. So here we are 10 minutes into this video, and I have just now been able to, I think, elaborate on the elements that make up these albums, which move away from this great quintet. They are this: a need and want to appeal to the street, to utilise new rock rhythms, electric instruments, electric guitars, psychedelia. There's a want to bring that into the music, but there's also this static sound that he's bringing in from Stockhouse and modern classical musicians. Sometimes I wonder if he's listening to the minimalists. Perhaps his interest in modality had taken towards Indian music, drone music. So there's this aspect of the eternal now. That's how I describe that. And then there's the utilisation of the studio to create structure. And so sessions aren't, we're doing this tune today, they become experimental. People are like fishing around it with sound. Miles Davis's horn being like the great big, fishing rod that's in the water trying to pull out some piece of magic. So I believe that this period is heralded by the album In a Silent Way, which I do believe I have over in the corner. I don't know if you can see, it's over there somewhere. In a Silent Way is one of Miles's great albums. It's very peaceful. In fact, there's a tune called Shh, Peaceful. It's very eternal now, if I can use that frame. He uses multiple electric pianos to create this sort of almost like twilight effect. People say this is the beginning of jazz rock fusion. It doesn't sound like that to me. It seems to me to be the beginning of space jazz. Now, In a Silent Way is interesting because it bridges between the great quintet. The album before, Feed the Kilimanjaro, is exploring these ideas as well, but he is exploring them with the musicians that he'd always worked with Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Wayne Shorter. And In a Silent Way, something different happens. He brings in other players, most notably Joe Zawinul, who brings in compositions like In a Silent Way. So now we have, as the 60s great quintet dissolves, this new quintet emerges with Chick Corea, Dave Holland, Jack DeJohnette, Miles, and various saxophone players, originally still Wayne Shorter. And this is doing all the gigs. And it's exploring and it's making strides in the music.
It becomes important to know how to grow and to know how to stay fresh. And the thing that Miles brought to that whole thing was an example to all of us of how to trust yourself, of how to use your imagination and let it be, and let yourself be. And all Miles ever wanted from people he worked with him was creativity. He wanted them to naturally be themselves and and express something, bring something to the music, because he played off of all of that. Miles played off of what creativity came his way, and then he participated with it, and he directed it sort of, and he put it into a form with the bands that he made and so forth, and he nurtured it. So that was the lesson that I learned, probably in various other terms corroborated by all the rest of my friends and these guys in that early band.
But Miles isn't going to those musicians anymore. He's utilising them, but he's bringing in other musicians. In a Silent Way is notable because of the lineup on it. In a Silent Way is cut together out of jams. And in that way, it's very groundbreaking. You can see that Miles loves this. And he decides to make a statement. And this is where we begin. The very first album on our journey into the electric albums of Miles Davis in the 1970s is Bitches Brew. It's an album personally for me that I found very difficult when I first bought it. And I stuck with it, I worked with it, and eventually it became my favourite album, or one of my favourite albums. And it changed me musically, like opened me up to the world. So this album I see as being very, very important in my journey. But going back to it now, is it just a bunch of jams? Long, endless jams? Well, not quite. Tio Macero utilised the looping of certain takes. There was a certain exploratory thing going on in the room with the musicians. But most notably, the difference between Bitches Brew and In a Silent Way is just the size of the band. Now, this gives you a key to understanding this album, and this is why I think he'd accept the influence at this point of Ornette Coleman. In the early 60s, Ornette Coleman made an album called Free Jazz. It features what he described as a double quartet. It wasn't one band of 8 people, it was 2 bands of 4 people. 2 drummers, 2 bass players, 2, I don't think there was any chordal instruments, 2 horn players and 2 brass players. And so there you set up a dialogue between those two bands. If you listen to Free Jazz, which is a really difficult album to digest, but once you realise there's two groups, start to focus on the one and find the one which is static and which one is not static and how they're relating to each other. This idea was then followed up by John Coltrane on the album Ascension. Okay, and what Miles does with Bitches Brew is he expands on this and brings in electric instruments and rock beats. We have often two drummers on here, sometimes three, but always two. We have two bass players, we'd have three keyboardists, we have bass clarinet played by Bernie Maupin, and we have the soprano sax of Wayne Shorter. Each thing is balanced. At one point you might have Lenny White on drums holding the groove down, very funky, whilst Jack DeJohnette is playing all over the top of it, or vice versa. Sometimes you'll have Dave Holland playing acoustic bass, while Harvey Brooks, who was a bass player with Electric Flag and had been a ground-breaking bass player on the albums of Bob Dylan, all right, is on electric bass. Incredible. I always think that's a really interesting. We got percussionists on their drummers, then we have bass, clarinet, soprano, saxophone, right? And what's balancing Miles? It's his new muse, a muse that had been discovered on In the Silent Way. It's John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin is key to these albums. Now what's interesting is John McLaughlin was not in the band. The band's something else. John keeps getting drafted in, but John's doing Tony Williams' Lifetime. Miles wants him to join the band, but he won't join it because he has more creative control over Tony Williams' Lifetime. Tony Williams' Lifetime has a crap deal, and nobody really wants to know, but they are groundbreaking. But I feel that the ideas that are going on in Tony Williams' Lifetime are then coming back into Miles's group through John McLaughlin. And John McLaughlin is given carte blanche, it almost seems like, on Bitches Brew. He actually has a track named after him on Bitches Brew called John McLaughlin. He's Miles's muse. Now, what does Bitches Brew do? Right, it has these incredible funky rock grooves. It has a sort of psychedelic electric sound, sometimes with all the keyboards swirling over the one top of each other. It's really psychedelic. We have the stinging electric guitar of John McLaughlin, not overdriven, but not a standard jazz sound. And through Miles's compositions, like the track Bitches Brew, which he's brought in, which are fragments, or Pharaoh's Curse, which is a Joe Zawinul composition, which has been reworked, or Sanctuary, which is actually a jazz standard. I think it's, what is it? I Fall in Love Too Easily. All those things are explored on Bitches Brew. It's a landmark album. Now, what's important, this album sells. That sort of burgeoning hippie scene that are listening to Grateful Dead, Jimi Hendrix, and they want to go to the next level, start buying this album. I think a lot of acid was taken in the late 60s to this album. So it sells 500,000 copies. So it sets up a precedent for this, for the record label. And what's that precedent? You go into the studio, you start jamming, it creates all sorts of different jams, and some of them are good, some are great, and when the magic happens, you could cut that out and then create structure. We have this great successful album, but everything's changed. The jazz critics don't like it. They think that Miles has sold out. This is really strange.
I think poor Brother Davis suffered from two things. One, he feared that he was going to lose his audience if he didn't begin to emulate his lessers.
Yeah.
And the other part, I guess, was a male version of, you know, the kind of menopausal stuff you used to see in discos when some woman who was 45 or 50 would come with...
And he's, well, why not accept what he said? I'm just constantly, I'm trying to be ahead of the game and trying to continue to experiment, and all guys like Stanley Crouch want me to do is play the same old stuff, kind of blue.
Well, I mean, but I mean, the question, I don't think that's really the question. It's not a question of whether or not he had to play the same songs over and over. The question was whether or not the form in which he went had any kind of true aesthetic weight to it. I mean, Duke Ellington continued to write new music and play new music all the way up to his death.
And it all had quality that matched the earlier work?
Oh, it continued to exceed
It exceeded.
Yeah, he continued to develop. See, Miles Davis got less and less and less important. In fact, you could tell by the clothes he was wearing that something was wrong with him.
This run of albums I'm now going to go through are difficult albums to listen to. They're not jazz rock albums. Miles has invented his own version of jazz rock. It's not until the 1980s he goes over to a much more established jazz rock sound. Now he's pioneered something else here. It's something else. And the influence of this is not going to be felt until the late 80s, early 90s. And then these albums are going to be incredibly influential. Right, so Bitches Brew was recorded between August 1969 and January 1970. I find that interesting. These sessions run across the end of 69 and the beginning of 1970. That always makes people look forward. With new decade, what's going to happen? The album's then packaged up, and by the end of March it comes out. Great big success. Miles moves from working in jazz clubs to playing rock clubs, supporting the likes of Laura Nyro or Jefferson Airplane or wherever it would be. And the next album that comes out in 1970 comes out in October the 28th, and this was recorded in June 1970, and it's the album called Live at Fillmore East. Now this album is marketed. There's loads of adverts. If you get on eBay, you'll find a ton of adverts for this album. Why? Because CBS thought, we've just had this huge hit, well, relatively for a jazz artist with Bitches Brew, we need to market this. But what this is a live recording of what he's doing with his new quintet. And in that regard, they're doing something else, and it's much closer to free jazz than what Bitches Brew is. This album is also captures a live recording which is quite harsh in its sound. This is jarring, harsh, loud, electric free jazz. This is an incredible album. I think in terms of the homogeneity between the musicians, it's greater than Bitches Brew. These are a bunch of musicians who have been playing together, and they got their own thing going on. It's very exciting, it's very raucous. Musically, I think it's better than Bitches Brew. But it's not like Bitches Brew. It doesn't have that sort of electric psychedelic. I always feel like Bitches Brew, it sounds like you've been wading through an Amazonian forest and you find some cut off, super culture, voodoo culture, full of magic and esoteric darkness. Live at the Fillmore East doesn't sound like that. It sounds like a great electric free jazz group going for it. We've had the addition of Keith Jarrett. Now, Keith Jarrett is Flavour of the Month. He's a virtuoso keyboardist, as is Chick Corea. These are the best in the world. Keith Jarrett's come in from the acoustic tradition. He was playing acoustic piano with Charles Lloyd. He's made to play electric keyboards. Often he's not even playing electric piano. He's playing some weird organ, like a Farfisa organ. I don't know what it is, but it's a really weird sound, and it's jarring. His improvisations at this point are quite incredible. Keith Jarrett on these live albums is the powerhouse for me. It's quite incredible, and you feel Miles has just let Keith loose. So, Live at the Fillmore East is a very important album. There is now a box set out called Miles at the Fillmore, and it captures these. Now, I want to say something about these box sets. I'm going to leave it to the end because I've come to a conclusion that these box sets that have come out aren't great. And this is what promoted me to make this video, to go, no, these are the albums that Miles brought out, and this is how we have to think about them. And the box sets skew it all. I'll come back to that in a minute. Around this time, Miles gets asked to score a film documentary about the great African-American boxer Jack Johnson. A character that Miles would love, known for his fast cars, having many white women around him and putting it to the white man. He loved it, and he wanted to create something tough. And it's interesting And this happens so many times in the history of rock and roll, where a film soundtrack allows a musician to have more freedom. We think of A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles, or Saturday Night Fever. You know, there's so many times, or even Tommy by The Who, which wasn't a film, I know, but becomes a film. When people start to think filmic, they start thinking a different way. Jack Johnson is seen as the great herald of jazz rock. It's recorded between June 17th and 20th, so it's made in 3 days straight. With a pickup band, we've got Billy Cobham on drums, we've got Michael Hendon as a soul bass player. On bass, we've got John McLaughlin on guitar. Guests turn up. At some point, Herbie Hancock turns up with his groceries under his arm, and Miles pulls him in. Makes him do an organ solo on an organ that is not working. He gets so frustrated, he just bangs the keyboard in frustration. Miles leaves it all in. Sonny Sharrock, the great free jazz rock guitarist, turns up at a certain point. And they don't quite get a whole album's worth of material. The rest is fleshed out by basically just cutting in old takes from In a Silent Way. But this album, which is a hodgepodge really, I think, becomes the herald of jazz rock. Why? Because something happened that nobody had any control of. Miles at this point is working in a different way. He's waiting for something to happen in the studio. And he seems to have set something up. He puts Cobham, Michael Henderson and John McLaughlin in there and tells them to stand there and wait while he messes around in the control room and not play. John McLaughlin starts jamming on a Sly and the Family Stone riff, right? And Miles spots something. That take of that riff is a Sly and the Family Stone riff. It becomes a feature of early jazz rock, and John McLaughlin takes it to the Mahavishnu Orchestra a year later. But the famous moment really is the opening moment, where John McLaughlin, again, standing there, being told not to play, feels like a naughty boy because he's a young man, he's in there, he's playing with Miles Davis, but he wants to jam with Billy Cobham and Michael Henderson, he wants to play. So he starts jamming on some chords which will become Dance and Mayor. It's a shuffle, and you can tell that musicians, when they're in the room waiting, they'll play a shuffle. So there they are shuffling away. But Miles spots that something's going on. I think he spots the fact that he wants to play over it. So he runs in to the live room, having said hit record, and you hear this all at the beginning of Jack Johnson. It captures something which is like electric. He runs in, he picks his trumpet up, and he shouts to John McLaughlin and Michael Henderson to change key. John McLaughlin changes key, Michael Henderson doesn't. Miles realises he's now got two competing keys, and he starts to play with only the genius Miles can between the two of them, incredibly. Turning this to a mistake, he turns into this sort of, polyharmonic system. And that creates the interest. Miles then does one of his greatest trumpet solos. And with that, the newness of that happened, I think jazz rock is born. It's so great, it's actually opening the doors to going, you can have shuffling rock beats, funk beats, you can do all this and still make heavy music, but it has to be made in this way. Okay? Now, the studio albums at this time feature a panoply of musicians, but now he has this group. And on, when would it be? The same time that Jack Johnson is being recorded. It's quite interesting, this, when I look at the dates. There's also a live recording made. I think it's at the Plugged Nickel. And those tapes are taken away, and they are put together with some studio recordings that Miles had done with the great Brazilian composer and musician Hermeto Pascoal. And they're brought together in this album, Live Evil. Now, Live Evil's really interesting. It's a live album, but it's the only live Miles Davis album to feature John McLaughlin. In fact, I believe I have it behind me here, so I'll grab it and show you. There we go. This. The artwork's much more closer to being like Bitches Brew. It's a Matty Klarwein cover, if I pronounce his name right. The unique balance that this quintet created, or I think it's a sextet, which would be now Michael Henderson on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, Chick Corea on keyboards, hiatus on percussion, Keith Jarrett on keyboards. That magical chemistry that's been created over years of playing now is actually wrecked with John McLaughlin walking into the mix. It's like Miles has thrown a spanner in the works. And I always think that John McLaughlin is like, he doesn't quite fit in the mix here, and he's trying to find a way in. But he does create that tension. All the way through these early albums, John McLaughlin is providing tension. So Live Evil stands alone. It's a live album, like Live at the Fillmore, but with John McLaughlin added and all these studio tracks. I absolutely love it. There's a fury. There's a sort of fieriness to it. It's an incredible album. But you can see, and when we look at the albums we've looked at so far, we have Bitches Brew, electric psychedelic rock, numerous musicians, almost like a double quartet going on. Then we have the Live at the Fillmore East, and it's this band with Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea. Then we get Jack Johnson, that's something else again. And then we get Live Evil, and that's like Live at the Fillmore East, but with John McLaughlin added, and he upsets the apple cart a little bit. Now, these sessions that are going on through the early 70s for Bitches Brew, for Jack Johnson, they're creating so much music. That music has just been stuck on boxes in the vaults at CBS. A lot of incredible music's not seeing the light of day. And this is interesting, you see. Around the time that Bitches Brew is made, there are some more sessions that are made later on with Billy Cobham on drums. Around about the same time, between Jack Johnson and Bitches Brew, he brings his sitar in there, and there's tracks like Go Ahead John and Great Expectations. These tracks don't get a release, but they're better and greater than anything on Bitches Brew. They're quite incredible. And at the same time Jack DeJohnette's going on, there's stuff that is approaching much more standard future, tracks like Duran, where John McLaughlin does some incredible guitar playing, and that doesn't see the light of day. Around about 1972, mid-1972 to the end of 1972, Miles is back in the studio. He's now embraced this funky sound, and he wants to make an album that will appeal to the street. This is 1972. Now, it would be very easy to say, he looked at all the jazz rock musicians who were having success with their funky jazz rock albums, and he wanted a part of that. It's not quite the truth. In 1972, there was no Headhunters. In 1972, Weather Reporters still exploring their electric jazz. I think Sweet Night is going to come out the following year. Billy Cobham hasn't even done Spectrum. So Miles, at this point, with these funky sessions, is pioneering something that's absolutely unique. And what's he doing here? It's almost like he's taken James Brown, mixed it with Indian percussion, South American percussion. He's working with Buckminster Fuller, who is bringing in these Stockhausen elements. He's interested in the Eternal Now. And the On the Corner sessions are really interesting. It produces a whole bunch of music. What Miles decides to do is to try and make an album which uses this sort of cartoonish, I mean, you can see it here, this sort of cartoonish, a sort of cartoonish representation of pimp culture in 1970s America. He brings this album that I think he wanted the kids to listen to, get down on it, like a street funky album, sounds like James Brown, but the beats on here are so twisted. They are like James Brown beats, but they're twisted. And there's Indian tabla all over it and psychedelia. At one point, John McLaughlin just walks into the studio, you can tell, sits his electric guitar down and starts playing all this mad, fuzzed out electric guitar. I think the best guitaring he ever did with Miles actually is on the Corner. That and possibly his incredible guitar solo he does on Go Ahead John. I could do a whole video on Go Ahead John. There's so much to talk about here, and these albums are confusing because the tracks aren't making it onto the albums. In fact, I don't believe there's even album sessions at this point. It's just Miles going in and doing his thing, and then these things being stored and cut down. If you go and put on the original On the Corner, which I feel has now been usurped by the big box set that came out that had all the sessions on, what you'll see is there's 4 tracks on there. It opens up with this great long track, which lasts for a certain time. It's the same riff pretty much all the way through, which is this weird drum beat going over and over again, and then this stabby bass line, and then every now and then this melody comes in, and it goes ba ba da 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 diddly da da diddly da diddly da. Now this is something nobody says about On the Corner. You know why? Because I don't think anybody actually sits down and listens to these albums. They just talk about them. I don't think anyone actually listens to them. I've listened to them all my life. On the Corner has this great long track, I think it's about 15, 17 minutes long. And then there's a track that comes in. Then this first track, I can't tell the title, it's got 3 titles. Then the next track comes in, it's only 5 minutes long, it's called Black Satin. Then you turn it over, you get another short track, and then you get a great long 20-minute track. Now what's interesting, they're all the same bloody track. It's the same tune. Yeah, there's different people soloing on it, but it's the same tune. It almost feels like he's done an album-long jam, and he lets it go for a certain amount of time, then he fades out, then he brings it back in, then he fades out, then he brings it back in, fades out, then he brings it back in and fades out. But it's not like that, because you feel it's been called. This long track, the short track, the long track, and the short track. I think the 2 long tracks are trying to make a statement, and the 2 short tracks, he sort of could there be a signal on this? Side A and side B? Is that what he had in mind? So he makes Tio Macero create these 2 single length edits that exist at the end of side 2 and the beginning of the end of side 1 and the beginning of side 2, and then these great big statements. Now what's special about the opening big statement? It's John McLaughlin. He's all over it. It's full of his sort of twisted, distorted electric guitar playing, and it's brilliant. There's some great saxophone playing, the soloing, it's like a soloing stuff. But actually, if you want to know which one the best one is, it's the last one on the Corner. Don't know what the title of it is, I'll put it up on here perhaps. That track is the most musically together, right? The head's there, it utilises different tempo changes, right? There's a guitarist on here called Dave Creamer, and I feel he fits into the mix much better than John McLaughlin. Dave Creamer is actually an incredible jazz guitarist. He's not on Wikipedia. I did look him up. The most notable thing I could say about him is what George Benson said. And George Benson called him one of the greatest jazz guitarists in the world. So that's a fair assessment of Dave Creamer. He's great. He's got a cleaner sound and he just weaves in. There are some videos of him. Check him out. Really interesting player. So On the Corner is a really interesting statement, but it's out there. It's like Miles' attempt to be commercial, but it's so out there. You literally have to sit through this one riff for a whole album. It fades out and then the riff comes back in, and what's notable are the solos. So On the Corner comes out. There's a great big push. It isn't the big success. It doesn't sell like Bitches Brew. And I think Miles at this point after that album starts to lose heart a little bit. We've had a line that goes, In a Silent Way, Bitches Brew, live at the Fillmore East, Jack Johnson, Live Evil, and then On the Corner. And that, you could almost see the elements coming together for On the Corner. At this point, I think it all goes a bit strange. And anybody who looks at this transition and thinks it's just a normal transition, I don't think it is. I think Miles' famous sort of, I would call it his retirement in 1975. This is the point where he just stops playing and he goes into some sort of drug-fueled hedonistic hell for about 5 years, emerging the other end. It's like the black corridor for Miles. Nobody knew whether he would pop out, but he did in 1981. And when he comes back, he's now a superstar and he becomes almost like a celebrity. He's on talk shows. And I think his group at that point is groundbreaking, but it fulfills a much more traditional role of a funky jazz rock band. These albums are something else. Just before the release of On the Corner, which comes out in November 1972, in September, he records a concert. And this album comes out in 1973. I don't have a date for it, but it's a long delay. It's this one here. I'll pull it out. Never gets discussed. In concert. This is like the live version of On the Corner. You can tell by the artwork. When this came out, and I have an original copy here, we didn't have a clue who was on it. Same with On the Corner. There was no musicians list on here. And if you, no track titles, if you take the album out, and it says the length of the track, 21 minutes, and Miles Davis as the writer. Right, this for me is further out. In Concert, which no one ever mentions, takes the ideas on the Corner and presents them live. And this band's changed. Jack DeJohnette's gone. Chick Corea's gone. They've all gone to have their huge, jazz rock and fusion careers, except for Keith Jarrett, who goes on to make the biggest selling solo piano album ever. Now he's got a new bitch of, and they're coming much more, it seems, from the rock world. It's a lot fiercer. This album, I love this album, and I love the fact that when you got this album, and there wasn't some big box set that you could go and listen to these on now, where it was all labelled and you had all the musicians on. You literally, it was like, it's like he's trying to stop time. You don't know where you are. You put the album on, it lasts 20 minutes. You turn it on to the next one, it lasts 20 minutes. You put it on to the next one, it lasts 20 minutes. It's really hard to differentiate one track from the other, but they are massively different. But it's because they just evolve, it's just because of the jamming. This is where Miles is like, he's doing something on these albums that no one's ever done before. It's quite insane. It's like he's breaking the bounds of music in terms of time and space, I feel. A lot of jazz musicians were interested. Sun Ra tried to do this. Coltrane tried to do this. This has got, it's On the Corner that doesn't have a personnel list. This does. Mike Henson on bass, Reggie Lucas on guitar. He's the guy that went on to produce Madonna. He also got the sack because he asked for more money. Cedric Lawson on organ, Al Foster on drums, and Toomey on congas. Balakrishna on electric sitar, Bedelroy on tablas, and Carlos Garnett on sax. This is brilliant, right? Something's going on here. And Miles is as much making this statement, but I think he's losing heart at the same time. I think being a musician, that what's happened is he's exploring the ideas, and he's allowed the ideas to take you to a natural point. Is it, and is this very pretentious of me to say, but was the last 5 years of him just taking loads of drugs, having lots of weird sex, and just living in this dark, rat-infested hovel of desperation, which is when they made the film about Miles Davis, they didn't feature his great moments. They had to feature this 5 years. So this 5 years exists in the cultural consciousness now. Maybe that 5 years was the artistic outcome of these experiments. Who knows?
You're gonna do more of this. Isn't this where I came in? You and here doing all this fucking what? Doing nothing. Fuck you, Dave. You ungrateful motherfucker.
In 1973, another album comes out. It's marketed like it's one of these funky 70s albums, but it's not. It's called Black Beauty Live at the Fillmore West. It's the same group that did Live at the Fillmore East, but the recording is much softer and the playing is sublime. This album, I believe, is the greatest album in this collection. If I was going to rank these albums, I'd put this at number one. I think it captured that original quartet of virtuosos, which were doing something absolutely unique, and it caught them a little bit later than Fillmore East. It caught a great gig, Humorous is incredible, but this is just sublime. When I put it on, I feel I'm listening to jazz, which is on the same level of the Love Supreme. It's unbelievable. Black Beauty, live at the Fillmore West, that was recorded in April 1970. Whereas Fillmore East was recorded in June 1970, so I've got that wrong. It's actually a little bit earlier. It's interesting. This is why I wanted the dates in front of me. It also comes out in 1973. We also get, in 1974, Big Fun. Now, Big Fun collects together some of the recordings that were on Jack Johnson and some of the recordings on Bitches Brew. They are edited together. Big Fun is better than Bitches Brew. There's a sideline track called Go Ahead John. And this is the peak of Tio Macero's experiments with the studio. When John McLaughlin comes in with his guitar solo, it's almost like they've created some sort of gated switch. I don't know what it is, but it's as though they recorded the guitar from two different places and it keeps switching between the two. And then you have Jack DeJohnette on drums, and that's been recorded in two separate places, and Tio Macero is switching between the two on that. So you have this live band jamming in this sort of Bitches Brew-esque jam, but the whole thing's shattering in front of you. It sounds like electronic music. It sounds like they're inventing jungle or drum and bass or something. Go Ahead John, I think, in terms of the early Miles Davis electric albums, Go Ahead John is one of the high points, as is Great Expectations. You see on Nefertiti being an album that came out with the classic quintet of the 1960s, where everybody plays the head over and over again, and it's the rhythm section that embellish. It's like an inversion of your usual jazz setup. This is an incredible album. One of Miles Davis's great albums, Big Fun. With again Bitches Brew type artwork, absolutely incredible. A lot of the sessions that he's done on the Corner that don't get used on the Corner, plus some of the sessions that go back to Bitches Brew and Jack Johnson, then get pulled together on another sort of compilation album, which is called Get Up With It. This is also incredible. These edits are unbelievable. There's a track on there which is half an hour long called He Loved Him Madly. It was recorded in 1974 by Miles Davis as a reaction to Duke Ellington's death. And I think that's really important that Miles Davis reacts in the way he does. This is the track that Brian Eno heard, and it's what invents minimalism. The great, this music is influencing so much music to come, but probably the biggest step to these albums is the invention of minimalism, and then eventually the sort of Windham Hill, what was that sort of music called? You know, the sort of ambient sort of background music. Miles is trying to create an ambience. Get Up With It also has a track called Rated X. An incredible track, which again seems to be foreseeing a lot of dance music in the late 90s, especially jungle and drum and bass. 1974 also sees the recording of another live album which doesn't see the light of day straight away. It's a live album. It's right at the end of the sort of this period before Miles disappears, and he decided to audition two musicians, I think the guitarist and the saxophone player, are auditioned on this album. It comes out later on in 1977, right in the middle of his hiatus, and it's called Dark Magus. It's possibly the most extreme of these sort of electric 70s albums. It's the most amped up, it's the most noisy, chaotic. There's not much going on in terms of jazz improvisation. They just seem to be in a loop. I love it. It's absolutely incredible. But what's far more interesting for me is the recordings that are made in 1975 out in Japan. Miles, I think he ends up in 75 in Tokyo. They recorded afternoon gig and an evening gig. The afternoon gig comes out as, I think, a Garter, and the evening gig comes out as Pangea. That day comes out with two double albums, and Agata and Pangea are absolutely incredible. The critics love Pangea. My favourite's Agata because the guitar playing in it is just so out there, feedback, shreddy, post-Hendrix noise, right? So there we have gone through the albums that we could call the collection of 70s electric Miles Davis albums. I've run through them. Now, the issue is, and I've got them all back there except for on the corner, I've got them all. They then start bringing the box sets out. Now what these box sets are, they're a collection of each session. So there was a whole bunch of sessions done around about in a silent way. They come out as a box set. There's a whole bunch of sessions that came out with Bitches Brew, which also covers the stuff on Big Fun and a few of the others. That's come out as a huge box set. And we're talking about these will have 4 discs full of stuff. You then get the box set for Jack Johnson. You get the box set for On the Corner. You get the box set of all the Fillmore recordings. You get the box set of all the recordings that were recorded at the Plug Nickel. Right? And that's 4 nights worth of recording. It's only the last night when John McLaughlin decides to come down and Miles goes, you know, do you want to come down? We've been recording an album all week. John, do you want to come up and jam? Can you imagine what the rest of the band felt like? Can you imagine what it felt like when the album comes out and he's utilised all the John McLaughlin takes? And he wasn't even in the band. At that point, Chick Corea's off doing something else. Keith Jarrett's off doing something else. Keith Jarrett's off doing something else. You see? And so I've studied these. I've studied these box sets. And it doesn't stop there. Towards the end of the 80s, we get a double album called Circle in the Round. It's a compilation that brings out outtakes from the 1950s all the way up to the late 60s, early 70s. Then we get Directions that comes out. I had them all. This is really hard to traverse because some of those tracks then appear on these box sets. I've struggled with the box sets a lot. I'm obsessed with this music. So when everyone came out, me being a huge fan of Bitches Brew, I sat there with the headphones on and I worked my way through every single disc. About 6 months ago, I got the In a Silent Way sessions and I went through all of those over and over again, trying to pull together, you know, what was going on. It's like reverse engineering the art for me. The whole idea was you go into the studio and you just play and there will be waste. Then you pull these together and you create an album. And these albums are trying to explore the eternal now. They are timeless. Right, so the musicians are jamming in a certain way. Miles is keeping a lid on it. It's not like you're just jamming and these magical things happen. Miles is keeping a lid on it over and over again, take after take, of them just going boom, 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 boom. And they wait for something to happen, and they've got to be honest, a lot of the time, not much is happening. And it's not because the musicians aren't virtuosos, it's because Miles is waiting, I think. He's waiting, he's manipulating them. There's something going on. And it's interesting to listen to the box sets if you're obsessed with these records and explore that, and that's interesting. But the artistic statements are here. These are the artistic statements, right? This is what you have to go to understand what Miles is doing. If you go to the box sets, you're even more removed. And there's so many of them. Then they found other concerts and they brought that out. And then there's bootlegs. I've got all of this stuff. The albums that I've just gone through, I believe if you want to explore this, you need to go album by album in this order. Right? Bitches Brew. Start with that. Then Live at the Fillmore East. Then Jack Johnson. Then Live Evil. Then On the Corner. In Concert. Black Beauty. Live at the Fillmore West. Big Fun. Get Up With It. Agata, Pangea, Dark Magus. That is the oeuvre, if that makes sense. Now we can start to group these together. Jack Johnson sits on its own, but Bitches Brew is definitely holding its hands with Big Fun. On the Corner is definitely holding its hands with Get Up With It. Live Evil is holding its hands with Black Beauty Live at Fillmore West and Black Beauty Live at Fillmore East. So you have these two albums that represent this quintet that nobody ever mentions, the Chick Corea Quintet. And then there's an album in the middle with John McLaughlin on as well, and these extra Hermeto Pasquale tracks. Dark Magus it's almost like that. Although Agata and Pangea recorded later, Dark Magus, it seems to be the doorway into the black place that Miles then goes. I hope this video has sort of outlined a way of getting a handle on these albums. And if you have got these albums, maybe you could then put the album on and then come back to this video and listen to a bit where I'm talking about that. And I hope what I've explained will relate it to the album next to it, or here or there, and you'll start to be able to pull this together. I've spent an hour on this. I feel I could come back to it again. I feel that these albums are so important that I almost want to do, and I've done this before, I've talked about Bitches Brew as a whole video, but it was a long time ago. I might have to do a series. Will the viewers be there? I don't know. Right? Can I really justify an hour talking about this? You definitely can't talk about Jack Johnson, but can you talk about this for an hour? Because this album's like, this is the elusive one. This is a nothing album. It's like, there's nothing on here. You know? You can put the first track on, listen to it for 3 minutes, and then go to the end of the last track and listen to 3 minutes. And you pretty much know what's going to happen in between. Is this jazz? Is this great music? It's the experience of sitting there throughout and going through the whole lot. I can't explain it. I had On the Corner, I've just got a CD copy of On the Corner. I lost my vinyl copy. I've had it in the car all week. It puts you into a certain place, and no other album puts you into that place. It's jazz. The soloing is incredible, but it's free jazz type of soloing. It's like you're in this internal now space. It's all very, it's all very like this hat. You're in this place. It's just looping, like modern dance music. But in there, the musicians represent a sort of schism that exists in the West. And they're being repressed, and then they're leaping forth, and then they're being professed, then they're being confused. Then they're being compressed. It's like that's what's going on. And you hear that works, and sometimes it comes together and sometimes it doesn't. There's a moment on the corner where it just all drops down and it's just mad percussion. It's a mixture of Indian percussion and Latin American percussion with psychedelic things. It's incredible. And I listen to it, I think, I can't go anywhere else for this. It's so impure. It's so not about the ethnic or cultural importance of these instruments. Miles doesn't care about that. He's got the musician to a place where they don't care. They've probably been in there for hours just playing and playing. They don't even know. There's the key. There it is. This is why I've got 2 minutes to explain it. I've come to the realization. These albums are about putting musicians into a place where they don't know they're recording anymore. And in that respect, it's a recording of the real person. If you like this video, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more like this, subscribe. If you want to become a Patreon member, you can do all those things. Thanks for watching this video. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.
The bottom line was, we would play a sold-out concert. Young people were starting to gravitate to that music. See, out of Bitches Brew came all those other broths. Weather Report, Return to Forever, that came out of that. But he said, I'm telling y'all, we are losing young black people. That was his comment. He said, I want to fuse a music that will also draw them in. At that time, him and Hendrix were talking. Miles was never planning on playing with Hendrix. That was a misnomer people thought about. What Hendrix asked him to do, because Hendrix was getting ready to put a new band together called Electric Church. He wanted to start fusing some jazz musicians in his music. He asked Miles to help him with putting the band together. But Miles was also dealing with Sly. See, for some reason, when you start to do contemporary music, it's almost like you reduce, well, if you're doing something popular, it's in some kind of way more trivial. The thing is, he wanted to reach that, and he wanted to bring more young black people in, and that's what started to happen when On the Corner came out. But the critics that were judging it, look, in all seriousness, I'm really glad that you did say that was a problem. The critics were saying, jazz critics, what it was and what it wasn't. But there was a whole new generation, and that music influenced that. Who's buying those records? That's not the issue. Expanding the boundaries of how you can be more creative with electronic. That's all we were trying to do, brother.
Well, what has it evolved into at this point? What do you see as happening?
Oh, I saw it influence a lot of things. I saw it, first of all, Santana, you know.
I'm talking about right now.
Brother, does Santana exist now? Is he alive? You asked me a question. It's not about him being a great thinker. Santana is a great influence. He influenced a lot of young players. You know, Mos Def. There's a lot of young people, Stanley, regardless if you give them credit or not. I'm saying a generational influence. More of them know about Miles than they do about Monk, and that's a problem. But the bottom line is, he had left that. Why can't we get past that? He no longer wanted to wear the same clothes. He was no longer thinking the same way, and there was a lot more than just he wanted to sell out and do commercial music.